The fields of Iowa stretched endlessly under the wide sky, golden in summer, gray and bare in winter. This was the land where she grew up, flat, quiet, predictable. The kind of place where a person's life could be mapped out before they even reached high school. Most kids she knew planned to inherit the family farm, work at the grain elevator, or at best, get a steady job in town. It was safe, ordinary, and small. But for her, the smallness had become unbearable. Her name was whispered more often than spoken directly, as though people were careful not to wake something inside her. She was quiet, reserved, rarely one to laugh loud or draw attention. Teachers described her as serious, while classmates simply called her different. She didn't fight back when teased. She simply stared at the ground, her thoughts buried too deep for anyone else to reach. The truth was simple. She had stopped being a child the day her brother's flag-covered coffin came home. Her brother, Daniel, had been everything she was not: loud, confident, charismatic. He enlisted in the Marines right out of high school, telling everyone at the county fair that he'd be back a hero. For years, she had idolized him, clinging to every story he told about boot camp, every photograph he mailed from overseas. When the knock came at the door, her world split in two, before the Marines and after. The folded flag sat in a wooden case on the mantel now. Her parents rarely spoke of him. Her father drank more. Her mother cried less. The house had grown colder, and in that silence, she carried her grief like a stone no one else could see. By the time she turned 18, she had made her decision. She walked into the local recruiter's office one rainy afternoon with her hair tied back and her jaw set. The recruiter looked her over skeptically. Another small-town girl with big talk, he assumed. But she didn't flinch. She didn't laugh nervously. She said 3 words with absolute clarity: "I want in." The recruiter explained the process, the difficulties, the grueling months ahead. He even reminded her that the Marines weren't for everyone, especially not girls from farms who'd never seen real struggle. She didn't argue. She simply signed the paperwork, her hand steady. When she told her parents, her mother broke down, insisting she couldn't bear losing another child to the war. Her father said nothing, just stared at his beer, as though the glass might give him an answer. That night, she sat on the porch and looked at the stars, wondering if her brother had once stared at the same sky before shipping out. She whispered to herself, "I'll finish what you started." Boot camp was hell. From the first second, the drill instructors tore into her like wolves. She was smaller than most recruits, lighter, and less physically imposing. They singled her out constantly, barking at her until her throat burned from shouting back. Many recruits cracked in those early weeks. Some begged to go home, but she never begged. She absorbed the punishment like stone absorbs rain. Every insult, every shove, every sleepless night, she took silently. At night, when others collapsed in exhaustion, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, hearing her brother's voice. "Don't quit. Don't you ever quit." The physical training nearly broke her. Obstacle courses left her scraped and bruised. Forced marshes shredded her feet, and the endless repetition of drills battered her muscles until they trembled. Yet something inside her refused to give way. When her legs burned, she thought of Daniel. When her lungs screamed, she remembered the flag on the mantel. Pain became a companion, not an enemy. Where she truly stood apart, however, was in her focus. During marksmanship training, recruits shook with nerves, missed targets, or fired erratically. She, by contrast, locked in with unnerving calm. Her rifle became an extension of her body. Every squeeze of the trigger was measured, deliberate, unhurried. She didn't just hit the target, she carved patterns into it. Instructors started paying attention. One day, after a particularly grueling exercise, The drill instructor walked down the line of exhausted recruits, stopping in front of her target. It was a perfect cluster of shots dead center. He looked at her, his usual scowl replaced by something almost like respect. He didn't praise her, not openly, but his eyes said what his mouth wouldn't: "You're different." Field exercises revealed another strength. While others stumbled through wooded terrain, stepping on branches and revealing their positions, she seemed to disappear into the landscape. She moved silently, slowly, like a shadow. More than once, she appeared behind instructors who thought they were hidden. The other recruits started whispering behind her back, calling her Ghost Girl. She ignored them. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there to survive. The weeks stretched into months, and the ranks thinned. Some washed out. Others scraped by just enough to graduate. She didn't just survive, she rose. By the time boot camp ended, she wasn't the quiet farm girl anymore. She was something else entirely. Sharper, harder, forged in fire. On graduation day, her parents came. Her mother's eyes were red, swollen from crying. But when she saw her daughter in uniform, standing tall, she held her tighter than she had since childhood. Her father, still silent, finally gave the smallest nod of approval. It was enough. But the moment that stayed with her most wasn't her parents or the ceremony. It was the private moment she allowed herself after everyone had gone. She stood alone on the empty parade ground, staring at the horizon. She could almost see Daniel there, standing in uniform, grinning at her. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply whispered into the wind, "I made it, Danny. I'm ready now." For the first time since his death, the weight she carried felt lighter. Not gone, but lighter. She had survived boot camp, but deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. Ahead waited deployments, missions, and battles that would test her far more than training ever could. And somewhere, somehow, she felt her brother was watching. The Marines had given her a place, but grief had given her a purpose. She wasn't there for medals, or for glory. She was there for him. And nothing, not pain, not fear, not even death, would make her quit. Graduating boot camp had proven she could endure, but it was only the first gate. The real testing ground was yet to come. Marines were not made in ceremonies. They were sharpened in fire, broken down and remade in training schools, where mistakes weren't forgiven and weakness wasn't tolerated. She reported to the School of Infantry, with her uniform pressed and her rifle slung, her expression unreadable. Around her, newly minted Marines laughed nervously, their pride still fresh, their fear just beneath the surface. She didn't laugh. She didn't boast. She watched, silent as ever, eyes scanning every detail. The instructors noticed. Infantry training was brutal, designed to separate those who could lead in combat from those who would crumble under fire. Long marches with full packs left shoulders raw and feet bleeding. Rifle drills ran day and night. Mistakes were punished with extra weight, extra miles, and extra humiliation. Many struggled. She adapted. On the first 20-mile forced march, recruits staggered and cursed under the load. She simply put one boot in front of the other, her mind narrowing to rhythm. Step, breath, step, breath. Her body screamed, but she pushed it into silence. At the end, when others collapsed on the dirt, she remained standing, chest rising and falling steadily. It was then that she began to draw notice, not just for surviving, but for refusing to break. Marksmanship training refined what boot camp had already revealed. On the firing line, Marines cursed at wind shifts and shaky hands. She simply adjusted, her scope aligned with deadly patience. One by one, her rounds tore through bullseyes at distances others failed to reach. An instructor approached after one drill, holding her target sheet. "You know what this is?" He asked, tapping the tight cluster of holes near dead center. "Accuracy, sir," she replied simply. "No," he said, his eyes narrowing. "This is unnatural." The nickname started there. Ghost, Phantom. Nobody knew how she did it. She just did. Urban combat training introduced chaos into the equation. Recruits stormed mock villages, doors splintering under charges, rooms filled with smoke and shouted commands. In the confusion, teams often lost cohesion, Marines shouting over each other, firing wildly. She was different. She flowed through the chaos, rifle steady, movements precise. Once in a drill, her fire team was ambushed in a narrow corridor. Panic erupted. Instead of freezing, she dropped low, slid to the flank, and neutralized the enemy targets before anyone else registered what happened. "Who told you to move?" Her instructor barked afterward. "No one, sir," she answered calmly. "You're supposed to follow orders." "I followed the mission, sir." The instructor studied her for a long moment before saying quietly, "Don't get yourself thrown out. You're too damn good." The most grueling test came during survival training in the wilderness. Recruits were dropped in teams with limited supplies, forced to navigate, hunt, and evade simulated enemy trackers. Most formed noisy camps and were captured within days. She vanished into the terrain. She moved silently, building shelters low to the ground, covering her tracks and blending with shadows. She ate what others wouldn't touch: roots, insects, anything to keep moving. At night, she stayed awake, listening for footsteps in the dark, rifle across her chest. Days passed. The instructors couldn't find her. When the exercise ended, her team returned exhausted, clothes torn, faces hollow. She walked back alone, rifle still clean, uniform mud-streaked but intact. No one had caught her. "Where the hell were you hiding?" one Marine asked. She didn't answer. She just gave the faintest of smiles. The legend grew. Her peers began to whisper more. Some admired her. Others resented her. She was too quiet, too controlled, too good. A few tried to provoke her in the barracks, mocking her size, her silence, even her family. She never rose to it. She never fought back with words. But on the range, on the obstacle course, on every field exercise, her actions spoke louder than anything they could say. Slowly, the mockery faded. Even the loudest Marines learned to keep their distance. One night, during a night fire exercise, everything changed. Recruits lay in defensive positions along a ridge, tasked with identifying and firing on targets in near darkness. Most struggled, missing their marks or firing blind. She lay prone, her cheek against the rifle stock, eyes steady on the dim silhouettes ahead. One by one, her rounds struck, each target falling in sequence. The instructors watched in silence. Afterward, one pulled her aside. "You've got something most don't," he said quietly. "You don't panic. You don't hesitate. And you don't miss. That's rare. Don't waste it." She nodded once. She already knew. Graduation from infantry school brought new orders. She would be assigned to a reconnaissance unit, a role reserved for the sharpest, toughest, most adaptable Marines. It wasn't a path most women were offered. It wasn't even one many men survived. But her record made the decision unavoidable. On her last night before departure, she sat on her bunk, cleaning her rifle piece by piece. Around her, Marines joked, played cards, and packed gear. She stayed silent, methodical, her hands moving with ritual precision. When one of the men asked why she never spoke, she finally answered, "Talking doesn't save lives." The room fell quiet. By the time she boarded the transport for her new unit, the whispers had already spread beyond her training class. Somewhere out there, Marines she hadn't even met were already saying her name, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with doubt, always with curiosity. Ghost, phantom. Nobody knew who she really was. But everyone knew she was different. She wasn't chasing attention. She wasn't chasing rank. She was sharpening herself for what came next. The Marines weren't just teaching her how to fight. They were teaching her how to disappear, how to strike without warning, how to survive where others couldn't. Every mile she ran, every target she hit, every bruise and scar, each one was shaping her into something the Corps hadn't seen before. She was no longer just a girl from Iowa. She was becoming the shadow her enemies would one day fear. The phantom was being forged. The desert was nothing like the rolling fields of Iowa. It was harsher, sharper, more alive with danger than anything she had ever known. Heat pressed down during the day until it felt like the air itself was on fire. At night, the cold sank into her bones. Dust coated her throat, her boots, her rifle, even her dreams. She had read about deployment in training manuals, but no book or instructor could prepare her for the raw, unrelenting reality of Afghanistan. This was not training anymore. This was survival. Her first assignment was with a small reconnaissance team set deep into the mountains. The region was crawling with enemy fighters who knew the terrain like their own hands. Villages were quiet but tense, eyes following every convoy, every patrol. Trust was a currency nobody carried here. She felt it immediately, the weight of stepping into hostile territory. The rules of home didn't matter anymore. Out here, one mistake didn't earn a push-up or a lecture. It earned a body bag. Her squad leader, Sergeant Halle, was a seasoned Marine with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. He didn't believe in handshakes or second chances. On their first briefing, he looked her over with narrowed eyes. "You're the rookie," he said flatly. "Yes, Sergeant. Keep your mouth shut, follow orders, and don't get anyone killed." "That's your job." "Yes, Sergeant." He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just moved on. To him, she was another green recruit who had yet to prove she deserved to stand among them. The first patrol came at dawn. The squad moved in silence through jagged valleys, rifles raised, scanning every ridge line. She kept her breathing steady, her senses stretched thin as tripwire. The terrain was unforgiving. Loose rocks, steep inclines, sudden gullies where ambush could unfold in seconds. Her eyes never stopped moving. Every shadow, every flicker of movement drew her attention. When her boots hit the ground, she placed each step carefully, as though the earth itself might betray her if she made too much noise. Halfway through the patrol, Sergeant Halle raised a fist. The squad froze. "Movement," whispered one Marine. On the ridge above, faint shapes shifted. A heartbeat later, gunfire cracked through the valley. Bullets chewed into the rocks around them. The squad dove for cover, shouts cutting through the chaos. Her heart slammed against her ribs, but her hands stayed steady. She sighted down her rifle, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. One target dropped. She shifted, fired again. Another figure vanished. Her squad returned fire, but it was her calm precision that forced the ambushers back. When the last shot faded, Sergeant Halle glanced at her, his face unreadable. "Not bad, rookie," he muttered before turning away. It wasn't praise exactly, but it was the first crack in his wall of doubt. Over the next weeks, the missions blurred together. Long patrols under a punishing sun. Endless nights of guard duty, ears straining for the crunch of footsteps in the dark. Searching villages where women hid behind doors and children stared with wide, unblinking eyes. Everywhere, danger lingered just out of sight. And every time danger showed itself, she was ready. Her steady aim and sharp instincts saved her squad more than once. During one mission, they walked into a narrow alleyway laced with hidden fighters. Gunfire erupted from rooftops. Chaos tore through the ranks. While others ducked and scrambled, she dropped to a knee, returning fire with surgical precision. She didn't fire wildly. She fired deliberately. By the time the squad regrouped, the rooftops were silent. Marines who had barely known her name now muttered it with respect. They still didn't know who she really was, just that when bullets started flying, she didn't flinch. But the hardest part of deployment wasn't the gunfire. It was the waiting. Days of endless monotony, watching dust blow across the horizon, knowing death could strike at any moment. Some Marines cracked under the pressure, their nerves fraying until every sound made them jump. She didn't. She sat in silence, cleaning her rifle, eyes distant, mind steady. At night, when the others told jokes or complained about food, she often sat alone, staring at the stars. They were the same stars she had seen from her porch back home, the same stars her brother had seen before his last mission. She whispered to him sometimes, words no one else would ever hear. "I'm here now, Danny. I'll carry this for us both." Her defining moment came during a night reconnaissance mission. The squad had set up in the mountains, watching a valley where enemy fighters were rumored to move weapons. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the wind. The moonlight cast jagged shadows across the rocks. Most Marines fought to stay awake. She didn't. Her eyes scanned ceaselessly, patient, unblinking. Then she saw it. A flicker of movement near the tree line, almost too faint to notice. She raised her scope. Shadows shifted, just enough to confirm her suspicion. Enemy fighters were moving in, creeping toward their position. "Contact, 12 o'clock, she whispered into the radio. The squad snapped to readiness. Halle peered through his binoculars, swore under his breath, and gave the order to open fire. The firefight was brutal. The enemy came fast, trying to overrun them. Tracers lit the night sky. Bullets sparked against rock. Marines shouted over the chaos. But through it all, she remained calm. Each shot she fired found its mark. Each movement was precise, controlled. While others emptied magazines in panic, she made every bullet count. When it was over, the squad was still alive. Not one Marine had been lost. Halle walked past the wounded, past the shaken Marines, and stopped in front of her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he gave the faintest nod. "You kept us alive tonight," he said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Word spread quickly. Marines in nearby units started whispering about the new recon recruit, the one who didn't miss, the one who didn't panic. Nobody knew her name. Nobody asked. But they began to say something else. "She moves like a phantom." The nickname followed her like a shadow. At first, she dismissed it. She wasn't here to be remembered. She was here to serve, to keep others breathing. But as the weeks passed and the stories spread, she realized something. Legends had power. They inspired confidence. They gave Marines something to believe in when the odds felt impossible. And if being a phantom meant saving lives, she would accept the title. Her first deployment ended months later, but the impact lasted far longer. When the squad returned to base, mud-streaked and hollow-eyed, Sergeant Howell pulled her aside. "You're different," he said simply. "I've seen men break out there. I've seen them freeze, cry, run. You didn't. You belong here. Don't forget that." She gave a small nod. Inside, she felt the weight of his words settle into her bones. Belonging was not something she had ever sought, but here, in the dust and fire, among men who would trust her with their lives, she had found it. For the first time, she wasn't just fighting for her brother's memory. She was fighting for the Marines beside her. The Phantom had taken her first steps into legend, and the war was only beginning. The order came down in hushed tones, delivered in the steel-walled operations room of the forward operating base. A convoy of Marines had gone dark in a narrow valley. No radio contact. No confirmation of life or death. Just silence. The valley was notorious. A jagged cut through the mountains, where every ridge line could hide a rifle and every boulder could conceal an ambush. Local intelligence called it the killing ground. Even veteran units avoided it when they could. But her squad was tasked with going in. Extraction and survival, Sergeant Hawley briefed. We go in, find our people, and bring them back. That's it. No heroics. If it's hot, we fight our way out. Everyone clear? They nodded, one by one. She did the same. Inside, her pulse quickened, but her face stayed calm. She had learned to master her fear long ago. Fear wasted time. Fear got people killed. They moved before dawn, shadows stretching long in the gray light. The valley walls rose steep on either side, jagged teeth closing around them. Every step echoed. Every gust of wind carried whispers of danger. Halfway in, the first shot cracked. It came from above, a sniper round that ricocheted off the rocks near Hale's head. The squad dove for cover, rifles snapping up. Then the valley erupted in gunfire. Enemy fighters poured from hidden positions, their shouts bouncing off stone. Bullets rained down. Dust filled the air. The Marines scrambled for what little cover they could find, pinned by fire from every direction. Contact left. Contact right. Move, move, move. Hawley shouted. But there was nowhere to move. The valley had become a trap. Pinned down, the Marines exchanged desperate fire, but the high ground gave the enemy the advantage. The convoy they had been sent to recover lay smoldering ahead, armored vehicles blackened, riddled with bullet holes. No movement inside. They're trying to box us in. One Marine yelled, panic cracking his voice. She pressed her cheek against the dirt, heart hammering. Around her, rounds snapped and sparked. Her squad was seconds from being overrun. Something inside her shifted. She scanned the ridge lines, not with panic, but with calculation. She saw the positions, the angles, the gaps in the enemy fire. She saw the one path that nobody else dared to take. And she moved. Where the hell is she going? Someone shouted as she broke cover. Low to the ground, she crawled across the rocks, slipping through dust and shadow. Bullets hissed past, close enough to burn the air against her skin. She didn't flinch. Every motion was deliberate, every pause measured. She disappeared into the chaos. Hawley saw it, eyes widening. Hold your fire. He barked, but his voice was drowned by the thunder of rifles. She climbed higher, higher, until she was behind the enemy flank. From her new vantage, she could see them all. Fighters silhouetted against the sky, rifles braced on rocks, pouring fire down into her squad. She exhaled. Her rifle rose. One shot. A man dropped. Another. Then another. The fighters spun, confused. Where was the fire coming from? She was already gone, sliding into a new position, striking again before they could react. Panic spread through their line. Below, her squad felt the pressure ease. Enemy fire faltered, breaking rhythm. Hawley shouted for his men to push forward. They surged, emboldened by the unseen hand guiding them. By the time the last shot faded, the valley was silent. Smoke drifted from the wrecked convoy. Bodies lay scattered across the rocks. She emerged from the shadows, rifle steady, breathing calm. Her uniform was torn, streaked with dust, but her eyes burned with quiet intensity. The squad stared at her in stunned silence. For a moment, even Hawley couldn't speak. Then the radio crackled. Unit Bravo, status report. Hawley lifted his handset, voice steady but rough. Mission complete. Valley secure. No Marine left behind. There was a pause on the other end. How the hell did you get out of there? Haley glanced at her, then back at his men. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, she stepped forward, her voice calm and even. Phantom 7, she said into the radio. The channel went silent. That night, back at base, the whispers began. No one understood how they had survived. The valley was a death trap, yet they had walked out with minimal wounds. Some swore they saw shadows moving above them, striking like lightning. Others said it was impossible. One Marine couldn't have done that alone. But they all remembered the call sign. Phantom 7. The word spread faster than gunfire. By morning, Marines in other units were already saying it. Some with awe, some with disbelief, but all with respect. Haley found her outside the barracks that night, sitting alone under the stars. "You saved us," he said bluntly. She shook her head. "We all made it out together. Don't play humble with me. You saw what no one else saw. You moved when no one else moved. That call sign." He paused, studying her face. "You know what it means now, don't you?" She looked up at the sky, remembering her brother's voice in the dark, remembering the promise she had made on the porch back home. "It means they'll come home," she said quietly. "That's all that matters." Haley didn't argue. He didn't salute. He just nodded once, the deepest respect he could give. From that day forward, she was no longer just a Marine. She was Phantom 7, the one who struck from nowhere, the one who saw what others missed, the one who refused to let her brothers fall. The mission in the valley was written into reports, analyzed in command rooms, but the paper couldn't capture what really happened. Paper couldn't capture the moment when hope had nearly died, and how one Marine had brought it back with every pull of a trigger. Her legend had been born in the killing ground, and it would only grow from there. News in a war zone never traveled in straight lines. It wasn't written in official reports or broadcast across bases. It seeped through the cracks, carried in half-heard conversations, retold around campfires, repeated in whispers across radio channels when the static was too loud. And in those whispers, one name began to surface: Phantom 7. At first, it was just a murmur among her own squad. The Marines who had survived the valley couldn't stop replaying the night in their minds. How death had seemed certain until it wasn't. How the enemy had been cut down by an invisible hand. They tried to explain it to others, but the words never came out right. She just wasn't there 1 second, and then she was. Like she disappeared and reappeared. She doesn't miss. I mean it, not once. Brother, I swear to you, she moved like smoke. Like a ghost. Within days, the story had already grown beyond the truth. In some versions, she had taken out 20 fighters on her own. In others, she had scaled the valley wall under fire without a single scratch. By the end of the week, someone swore she had been shot 3 times and kept fighting. She said nothing. She let the rumors swirl. She didn't need the attention, didn't want it. But she understood something the others didn't. Legends had power. Legends made Marines believe the impossible could be survived. And belief, in a place where death lived in every shadow, was sometimes more important than bullets. Her commanders noticed the talk, of course. Officers didn't like rumors they couldn't control. After one debriefing, a captain pulled her aside. "You've got a reputation starting, Marine," he said, his tone sharp. "That can be dangerous. Rumors grow into expectations, and expectations get people killed. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," she replied evenly. "Good. Keep your head down. Do your job. Leave the stories to the fools who need them." She saluted, but inside, she thought differently. These fools were the ones walking into ambushes, The ones waking in sweat at midnight. The ones who needed someone to believe in. If her silence and her rifle could give them that, so be it. The nickname began appearing in strange places. One night, as she passed through the mess hall, she overheard two Marines at another table. They say Phantom 7 doesn't even breathe when she shoots. Just holds it forever like a machine. That's nothing. I heard she can walk through a whole village, and not one dog will bark. She kept walking, tray in hand, eyes forward. They didn't even realize the phantom they spoke of was standing 10 feet away. Another time, she caught sight of graffiti scratched into a bunker wall. PH7, Death Walks Silent. She traced the letters with her fingers for a moment, then turned away. Not all the whispers were kind. Some Marines resented her. She's just lucky. Right place, right time. No way she's doing half the things people say. It's bees. Others turned their jealousy into mockery, muttering about the ghost girl behind her back. But when it came time to move out, when rifles were locked and helmets tightened, those same Marines suddenly felt quiet around her. Because even if they didn't believe the stories, some part of them wanted her nearby when the shooting started. Her squad felt it most strongly. After the Valley mission, their bond with her deepened into something unspoken. They trusted her without question. When Halle gave orders, eyes often flicked to her too, waiting for the smallest nod. She became the anchor, a silent reassurance that they would come home. She never asked for that role, but she carried it anyway. One night, as they cleaned weapons under a dim lantern, Private Lopez broke the silence. Why 7? What's it mean? She didn't look up from her rifle. It means I'm number 7. 7 what? She shrugged, reassembling her weapon with precise motions. That's for me to know. The answer only deepened the mystery. Lopez spread it around the barracks within hours. The Phantom doesn't explain herself. She just is. Higher command tried once more to drag her into the spotlight. A colonel requested she sit for an interview, to put her face and name in front of a camera. She refused. Respectfully, sir, she said firmly, the mission is about the Marines, not me. The colonel frowned, but didn't press. He knew what she knew. Heroes who sought cameras rarely lasted long. The legend continued to swell anyway. Marines began carving P7 into helmets, scratching it into rifle stocks. Some even carried the letters on scraps of paper, stuffed into their pockets like talismans. During one mission, a frightened replacement Marine whispered to her, "Is it true? Are you really her?" She didn't answer. She just adjusted his gear, tightened the strap on his helmet, and said, "Keep your eyes up. That's how you stay alive." For him, the silence was answer enough. The strangest part wasn't the stories others told. It was the way the legend began to affect her own perception. In battle, she found herself moving differently, not recklessly, but with a confidence that came from knowing others believed in her. Fear receded further, replaced by a sense of purpose bigger than herself. She wasn't just fighting for her squad anymore. She was fighting for every Marine who whispered her name, for every soul who needed to believe that even in the darkest valley, someone could guide them out. But she also felt the weight of it, pressing heavier each day. If she ever failed, if she hesitated, if she missed, if she faltered, the myth would collapse, and with it, the hope it carried. One evening, she sat on a sandbag wall, staring at the horizon where the sun bled into mountains. Halle joined her, lighting a cigarette. "They're all talking about you. You know," he said through the smoke. "I know. Half of it's garbage, but they believe it. Belief matters out here." He took a drag, exhaled slowly. "But don't let it eat you alive. You're a Marine. You bleed like the rest of us. Don't forget that." She nodded, but didn't speak. Because deep inside, she already knew. She wasn't just a Marine anymore. She was a symbol, and symbols couldn't afford to break. By the time her deployment neared its end, Phantom 7 was more than a call sign. She was a story told in hushed voices around bases, a myth that stretched farther than she had ever walked. Marines she had never met swore they had seen her. Others claimed she was 2 people, or 10, or not real at all. She let them wonder. She let the whispers grow. Because in war, truth mattered less than survival. And as long as Marines believed in the Phantom, they would fight harder, hold longer, and maybe, just maybe, come home alive. The air inside the operations tent was sharp with tension. Maps sprawled across a long table, pins marking choke points, supply lines, and possible ambush zones. Officers leaned in, their hushed voices bouncing off canvas walls, the hum of generators a constant background. She entered quietly, rifle slung across her back, helmet tucked under her arm. She was used to blending into the background, unnoticed even in a room full of Marines. But that morning, the atmosphere shifted the moment her boots touched the floor. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. Word had spread ahead of her. The whispers had reached even here. At the far end of the table, a decorated Marine colonel straightened his posture. His uniform was pressed sharp, ribbons heavy on his chest. He was a man known for discipline, authority, and an unyielding command presence. His eyes locked onto her, cold and probing. "You," he said, voice clipped. "Step forward." She obeyed without hesitation, boots thudding softly against the plywood floor. The room fell silent. The colonel's gaze swept over her. He was measuring her, weighing the rumors against the reality standing before him. In his mind, she was just another Marine, smaller than most, quieter than most. And yet men he trusted whispered her name like a prayer. He didn't like what he couldn't explain. "Name," he demanded. She gave it, calm even without pride. "Unit," she answered. His jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly. "Call sign." The words carried weight, more than a simple request. The officers in the tent straightened. They had heard the whispers too, though none dared speak them aloud. She paused, eyes steady. Then, with the same calm tone she had used on the radio in the valley, she said, "Phantom 7. The effect was immediate. A ripple ran through the tent. Some officers exchanged stunned glances. Others looked away as if they'd heard a forbidden word. The silence grew heavy, thick enough to choke. The colonel froze, his expression hard, but betraying the faintest flicker of shock. He had heard the call sign. Everyone had. It was painted across the whispers of every base, carried in the nervous laughter of replacements, etched into stories told in darkness. But hearing it from her lips, spoken not as rumor, but as truth, struck him harder than any bullet could. He studied her, searching for cracks. "You expect me to believe," he said slowly, "that you are the Phantom?" Her expression didn't change. "I don't expect anything, sir." "You asked." I answered. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't defiance. It was fact, delivered with the blunt honesty only a Marine could muster. The colonel's hands curled against the table edge. For a moment, anger sparked in his eyes, not at her, but at the sudden realization that the legend he had dismissed as campfire myth was standing in front of him, flesh and blood. He had commanded for decades. He had seen men turn to heroes and others fall to dust. But this was different. One of the younger captains finally broke the silence. "Sir," he said carefully, "reports from the Valley match?" Her account. Survivor's credit. Enough. The colonel's voice snapped like a whip. The captain shut his mouth. The colonel turned back to her. "Do you know what they're saying about you? Do you know what kind of distraction this causes?" "Yes, sir." "And you let it continue?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. I don't speak the stories, sir. I just fight the battles. That answer caught him off guard. It was not defiance, not humility, something in between. A refusal to take ownership of the myth, yet an acceptance of the burden it carried. He stepped out from behind the table, boots echoing against the floor as he closed the distance between them. He stopped inches away, towering over her. His eyes searched hers for hesitation, for fear, for anything that might prove she was just another Marine, wearing a dangerous nickname. But her stare didn't falter. Behind those eyes, he saw the calm of someone who had already walked into hell and returned. You understand, he said quietly now, that legends break men. They build expectations that no human can meet. Marines will follow you into fire, thinking you can't fall. And if you do, they'll fall too. She inhaled slowly, steady as ever. Then I won't fall, sir. The words were not boast, not bravado. They were a promise, not to him, but to the Marines who whispered her name in the dark. For the first time, the colonel had no reply. The tent remained silent, officers shifting uncomfortably. It was as if the room itself held its breath, waiting for what would come next. Finally, the colonel stepped back. His voice, when it returned, was harder, but edged with something new, respect. Very well. Phantom 7. He didn't mock the name. He didn't dismiss it. He spoke it with recognition, as though saying it aloud made it real at last. He turned to the room. We move at 0400. Dismissed. Afterward, as Marines filed out of the tent, some glanced at her with awe, others with unease. The legend had revealed itself, and it was not what they expected. Outside, under the desert stars, the colonel found her again. He didn't speak at first, just studied her in the dim glow of a lantern. I thought Phantom 7 was a lie, he admitted finally. Something men made up to give themselves courage. She adjusted her rifle strap. Maybe it was, sir. Until it wasn't. He nodded slowly. The weight of command had taught him many things, but humility came hardest. That night, he felt it heavy in his chest. You're not what I pictured, he said honestly. She allowed herself the faintest of smiles. Nobody ever does. From that day forward, his tone toward her changed. He didn't coddle her, didn't place her on a pedestal. But when her name was spoken, even he gave it weight. And though she still hated the attention, she knew one thing had shifted forever. Her legend was no longer just whispers. It had been spoken in the presence of command, acknowledged and made real. Phantom 7 was no longer a story. She was a fact. The colonel's acknowledgement changed everything. Not in an instant. Marines didn't work that way. They were too proud, too hardened, too stubborn to hand respect out like candy. But in the days after that operations tent meeting, a shift began. Small at first, like the turning of a tide, then growing into something that could not be ignored. Phantom 7 was no longer a whispered rumor in shadows. She was here, walking among them. And the Marines were watching. The first test came sooner than expected. The battalion was ordered into a contested valley network, a place where enemy fighters had dug in for months, fortified with tunnels, booby traps, and ridgelines perfect for ambush. Everyone knew the risks. Everyone knew the odds. The colonel, once skeptical of her legend, placed her unit on point. Not as punishment, but as recognition. If Phantom 7 was truly who she claimed to be, then this was where she would prove it. As the column advanced, eyes kept flicking to her. New recruits stole glances. Veterans sized her up with careful calculation. Some doubted. Some hoped. All waited. She felt the weight of their expectations pressing against her shoulders, but she didn't flinch. Pressure was nothing new. Fear was nothing new. She walked steady, rifle ready, senses tuned to every shift of wind, every crack of stone under boots. And when the ambush came, she was ready. The first explosion tore through the column. An IED buried beneath loose gravel. Shrapnel shredded the air. Men dove for cover. Screams filled the valley. Then came the gunfire, pouring from the ridges. Chaos erupted. Marines scrambled, shouting orders, dragging wounded to cover. But she didn't freeze. While others ducked, she rose. While others fired blindly, she scanned, calm and deliberate. She picked out muzzle flashes on the ridgeline, read the angles, and moved with deadly precision. 3 shots, 3 fighters dropped. A gap opened in the enemy's fire. Push left. Move now. She shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Her squad obeyed without hesitation. They trusted her tone, trusted the steadiness in her command. Even the colonel, watching from the center of the column, saw it, Marines rallying not to him, but to her. The battle stretched for hours. Every ridge a new fight, every tunnel a new threat. But step by step, they pushed through, guided by her uncanny ability to read the terrain and anticipate the enemy. At one point, when an enemy position threatened to pin down the entire column, she broke from cover, crawling through dust and smoke until she was behind their line. Alone, she silenced the threat, then reappeared as if nothing had happened. By the time the valley was cleared, exhaustion weighed heavy, but the Marines walked out alive. More alive than anyone had dared hope. The respect grew in that moment, not given, not requested, but earned through fire. That night, around the campfires, the whispers were gone. In their place came quiet nods, subtle glances of acknowledgement. Men who had once mocked the legend now polished their rifles in silence, knowing they owed their lives to the very Marine they had doubted. For the first time, she felt the myth fade away, replaced by something more solid. Not whispers, not rumors, but trust. The colonel summoned her later, in a makeshift command post lit by lanterns. He stood with his arms crossed, studying a map, but his eyes lifted when she entered. "You disobeyed direct positioning twice today," he said evenly. "Yes, sir," she replied without excuse. "You left your flank exposed to silence that ridge." "Yes, sir." He studied her, the stern mask still fixed, but his tone softened. And because of it, 50 Marines walked out alive. She stood at attention, waiting for reprimand. Instead, he exhaled, long and low. "I've led men for 30 years. I've seen bravery, recklessness, cowardice. But what you did out there," he shook his head, as if reluctant to say the words. "You didn't fight like a soldier. You fought like someone carrying every life on their shoulders. That's different. That's rare." Her jaw tightened, but she stayed silent. Finally, the colonel stepped closer. His voice dropped, almost a whisper. "You've earned my respect. Don't make me regret it." For a man like him, it was the highest praise she could ever receive. Over the next weeks, the change became undeniable. Veteran sergeants who once ignored her now sought her advice before patrols. Young recruits straightened when she passed, whispering her name not as rumor, but as reverence. Even officers, hardened by years of command, found themselves listening when she spoke during briefings. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted it. But she carried it with the same discipline she carried her rifle. Respect was not a medal. It was not a ribbon. It was a living weight, earned drop by drop, bullet by bullet. And it was hers. But respect came with a cost. Every mission now carried doubled expectations. Every Marine looked to her as though she could not fail. If she stumbled, if she hesitated, if she bled too much, their faith might collapse. The pressure gnawed at her in quiet moments. Alone in her bunk, she replayed every shot, every decision, every life saved or lost. Could she carry it forever? Could anyone? Yet each morning, when boots hit dirt and rifles were checked, she pushed the doubt away. Marines didn't have the luxury of weakness. One evening, as she cleaned her weapon in silence, Halle sat beside her. "You know what's funny?" he said, voice low. "6 months ago, half the battalion laughed at your name. Now they'd follow you into fire without a second thought." She didn't look up. "Respect is earned." "Yeah," Halle said, smiling faintly. "But not like this. Not this fast. You didn't just earn it. You dragged it out of their guts, made them choke on it. That's rare. That's dangerous." She finally glanced at him. "Dangerous for who?" Halle met her eyes, serious now. "For you. Because they don't see a Marine anymore. They see a symbol. And symbols aren't allowed to break." The words sank deep. She didn't answer. But she understood. The colonel, too, began to change in her presence. Where once he had bristled, now he sought her out quietly, testing her judgment, listening to her insights on terrain and enemy movement. He never admitted it openly, but his trust was clear in the way he adjusted plans after her input. For him, respect was not a gift. It was a battlefield calculation. And she had earned it beyond denial. By the end of that deployment, Phantom 7 was no longer a myth, no longer just a call sign. She was flesh and blood, proven in fire, tempered by doubt, and recognized even by the hardest of men. Respect in the Marines could not be demanded. It could not be claimed. It had to be carved out, inch by inch, under fire and against resistance. And she had carved hers deeper than most ever dreamed. As she stood one night on the edge of camp, stars burning over the desert, she thought of her brother, of the promise she had made long ago. She hadn't become a legend for herself. She hadn't earned respect for glory. She had done it so Marines could come home. And as long as they whispered her name with respect, she knew she had not failed him. The sun rose over the forward operating base in soft shades of gold and amber. The desert was quiet for once, the tension of countless missions replaced by the faint hum of generators and the distant clatter of boots. Yet even in the calm, her presence carried weight, the kind that was felt before it was seen. Phantom 7 walked through the camp alone, helmet under her arm, rifle slung. Soldiers paused, saluting automatically, some whispering her name in awe. She did not respond. She never did. Respect, after all, could not be demanded, only earned. And she had spent years earning it with every step, every shot, every life saved. The colonel approached her quietly, his usual stern demeanor softened by the years and the weight of command. He had become one of the few men who truly understood the balance she carried, the immense responsibility that came with being more than human in the eyes of those who depended on her. "You've changed this unit," he said softly. "You've changed me." She nodded once. "I didn't do it for glory, sir. Just to make sure everyone came home." He studied her, expression unreadable. Then, with a quiet sigh, he said, "They'll remember you. You know that, right?" She allowed herself a faint smile, the smallest crack in the armor she wore so carefully. "Let them. I'm not doing it for the stories." By now, her legend had spread beyond her squad, beyond her battalion. Whispered. Tales of Phantom 7 reached distant bases, echoed in mess halls, and traveled along radio channels. Some stories exaggerated her feats, others understated them. A Marine might tell a replacement that she had walked through gunfire without flinching. Another might say she had climbed a ridge under sniper fire alone and saved an entire squad. None were quite accurate, and yet all carried a kernel of truth. She had long learned to ignore exaggeration. Myths were not her concern, but their effect on her fellow Marines was undeniable. The whispers inspired courage, where fear might have taken hold. It was during a joint operation that the full weight of her influence became clear. The team had been sent to secure a remote village. Intelligence suggesting enemy fighters had fortified positions and hidden civilians among them. As they approached under cover of darkness, tension rose like a tide. Recruits hesitated. Even seasoned Marines double-checked their gear, eyes scanning the shadows. But when she led the advance, moving low and silent, a change rippled through the group. Confidence replaced hesitation. Marines who had been nervous moments before now followed her without question, moving with precision, trusting her instincts. Her presence alone commanded coordination, bravery, and focus. Phantom 7 was no longer just a nickname. She had become the embodiment of what the Marines aspired to be in the field. Calm under fire, unflinching, unbreakable. The firefight that followed was brutal. IEDs detonated beneath vehicles, gunfire erupted from hidden positions, and chaos threatened to overwhelm the squad. But her strategies, her movements, her steady voice over the comms turned panic into action. She directed cover fire, identified escape routes, and neutralized threats with surgical precision. Each move she made had been rehearsed in training and refined under fire. By the time the operation ended, every Marine was accounted for. No one had fallen. And once again, the whispers began, spreading like wildfire. Phantom 7 had led them through impossible odds. Yet she remained unchanged, stoic, and silent. She did not bask in glory. She did not seek recognition. She carried on as she always had, moving forward, preparing for the next challenge. Over time, the legend became larger than a single person. New recruits learned the name before they even saw her, treating it almost like a symbol of hope. Veterans shared stories of her feats as cautionary tales of precision and patience, illustrating the difference between panic and control, recklessness and discipline. One evening, she was approached by a young Marine, barely out of training. His eyes were wide, nervous, and filled with admiration. I just want to know," he stammered, "how you do it, how you stay so calm when everything's falling." Apart? She studied him quietly, then replied with simple words. "You focus. You breathe. You trust your training, and you trust the Marines beside you. That's all. The rest is luck and faith that you won't fail them." The young Marine nodded, absorbing her words like a lifeline. In that exchange, her legacy was no longer just her actions. It was the lesson she imparted, the quiet strength she instilled in those who would follow her into danger. Even the colonel began to rely on her judgment in ways he had never anticipated. During strategy meetings, he sought her insight on terrain analysis, enemy behavior, and mission tactics. Though he never openly admitted it, the battalion began to operate with greater efficiency and confidence when she was present. Her perspective, honed in countless battles and refined under fire, had become indispensable. Yet she never asked for credit. Recognition, she knew, was fleeting. The lives saved, the missions completed, and the Marines inspired were reward enough. There were moments, though, when the weight of her legend pressed hard. Alone in the quiet of the night, she reflected on the Marines who had fallen, the decisions that had haunted her, and the responsibility she carried. Being Phantom 7 was more than a call sign. It was a mantle that demanded perfection, sacrifice, and silence. Some nights she would wake in the dark, the hum of the desert wind in her ears, haunted by the echo of lost voices. But then she would see the fresh faces of recruits, the steady hands of veterans, and the quiet nods of those she had led through fire. And she would know that every sacrifice, every ounce of pressure, every moment of fear had been worth it. When her deployment ended, a unit gathered to see her off. Marines lined the sand-swept roads, saluting, nodding, and whispering her name. The whispers were no longer uncertain or fearful. They were reverent. They had seen her, known her, and trusted her with their lives. The colonel approached, his uniform immaculate, ribbons shining even in the fading light. He extended his hand, firm and steady. "Phantom 7, he said, "you've done what few Marines could ever hope to achieve. Not just surviving, not just fighting, but shaping every Marine who followed you. Don't ever forget that." She shook his hand, silent, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. "I won't, sir," she replied softly. He nodded once, then stepped back, letting the line of Marines pay their respects in their own way. On the transport flight home, she sat quietly, watching the desert fade beneath the clouds. Months of war, firefights, and whispered legends seemed to condense into this single moment of stillness. Her thoughts drifted to her brother, to the promise she had made on the porch in Iowa, to the Marines she had led, protected, and inspired, to the lives she had touched, both saved and lost. Phantom 7 was no longer just a Marine. She was a symbol of courage under fire, of calm in chaos, and of the power of quiet leadership. A living legend, but one grounded in the simple truth of action, sacrifice, and responsibility. She didn't seek fame. She didn't crave recognition. But she understood that the story she left behind would outlive her footsteps in the sand, outlast the battles she fought, and echo in the hearts of Marines for generations to come. And that was enough. Back in the United States, new recruits would whisper her name in training camps. Seasoned Marines would recount her actions during debriefings, and commanders would analyze her tactics for lessons in strategy and leadership. Phantom 7 had become more than a call sign. She had become a legacy, a reminder that heroes were forged not in applause, but in silence, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to those who relied on them. And as long as the Marines carried her story forward, she would never truly be gone. Because legends, once earned, do not fade. They live on in every heartbeat of the people they protect. Phantom 7 had become immortal,